All right. Well, welcome everybody once again to another early music trivia night from Early Music America in partnership with the Bach Beethoven Experience. The third of our partnerships is part of the Well-Tempered Musician Wellness Series that we've been offering that started back in January. And we're kind of having a blowout in this final of our three collaborations here with several guests, and tonight we'll be talking about Gaelic music traditions, and so you'll have lots that you'll learn about it, and also you get to play along with us from home. Feel free to put your answers if you're playing from home into the comments for YouTube or Facebook or on Twitter, and we'll be able to see those and interact with you all that way. So other than that, I think we're ready to go, and so I'm going to turn it over to Thomas, Brandy, and Leanne from Bach Beethoven Experience, and let's get started.
Cool. Well, how about Brandy? Why don't you introduce our guests, and David, would you throw up our handy dandy presentation? Sweet.
Yeah, awesome. Well, cool. So I am Brandy Berry Benson. I'm one of the directors of the Bach and Beethoven Experience, and we are super thrilled, as David said, to have a blowout of guests tonight. We are really thrilled to have David McGuinness of Concerto, Caledonia, from the other side of the world. He is literally coming to us from the middle of the night. So thank you, David, for doing that. It is such a huge pleasure to finally meet a face to all the emails from years and years ago. We also have Sarah with the Berwick Fiddle Consort. It is so nice to meet you. I love your tag for your group, Folk Music with Guts. So thank you for being on as well.
Hi.
Yeah, hello. And then Keith Collins, who I've known for a long time, played in many iterations of many different types of Baroque gigs together, and I've seen him play a lot of different instruments practically every time that I've played a gig with him. So, Keith, thank you for joining us. He plays with everybody on a lot of different things. We'll get to hear about that later. But yeah, so that is a rundown of our guests.
Excellent. And so for those who have participated in either our BBE Live, which is on most Fridays, or for those who join us for the EMA Live, you will know how this works. But for those who are joining us for the first time, don't worry. We will help run you through. And those who have joined us before know that first up is Leanne. Leanne, why don't you tell us how your game will work?
All right. So this game, The Sorted Lives of Composers, is going to work like this. I am going to read you a paragraph about a composer. I may or may not leave out specific information that might give away the answer. But there will be 4 multiple choice composer answers on the screen that you get to choose from. But after I am done reading the paragraph, there will be a little thinking music for you to contemplate what the answer might be. So without further ado, let's get started. So question number 1. This Irish composer, musician, and folk music collector was born in 1773. In 1792, at the age of 19, he was employed to notate the music of the last of the oral tradition Irish harpers at the Belfast Harp Festival. He later went on a number of collecting tours to transcribe more traditional music. Captivated by the traditional Irish music he heard, he collected, arranged, and published a collection of almost 300 tunes in 3 volumes, titled The Ancient Music of Ireland. However, this composer was a classically trained musician who did not understand the unique characteristics of Irish music. And when transcribing tunes, he corrected them according to classical music. Additionally, he often altered the original melodies to suit the tastes of what he thought his public wanted to hear. He only published about a quarter of the music he collected throughout his lifetime. His manuscripts were lost after his death, but were accidentally rediscovered in 1907 through a chance encounter in London between the Belfast musician Charlotte Milligan Fox and the composer's grandson. They are now mainly held in Belfast in the library of Queen's University. Is this composer William Neal, Henry McCracken, Edward Bunting, or Thomas Rosengrave? But first, a little thinking music. So do any of our guests want to take a first stab at what they think the answer is? Don't be bashful.
I think I might know.
Well, that's good because
Well-
then we won't fail.
Yeah, so being a harper myself, I kind of have a leg up on this one, so I was hoping somebody else would go first.
I mean, yeah, I know what the answer is.
Yep. Yep. Good. Anybody else want to go for this? Anybody? All right. Well,
Anyone?
So, yeah.
The reason that this is fresh in my mind is because the great Irish harper Siobhan Armstrong was telling me in great detail quite recently about a particular notebook by this person, and she's been decoding these really rough transcriptions that this person made of a harper in the 1790s, and trying to work out, what really happened. How can you tell from these sort of scribbles, and he's sort of gone over it in pencil and over it in pen again, and it's a real mess. And she's managed to decode in great detail all of his little annotations, and now has a pretty good, as good an idea as we can get as to what the original might have sounded like. So I know who it is.
Yeah, same.
Boy, you really hyped that one up. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm sure that you and I are in agreement that it's C. Edward Bunting.
Yes.
He was this young organ student at the time, from what I understand, and I'm not sure exactly how he was chosen to be the one to go and note music, but it seems to be that he was sort of relying on his skills that we all go through in music school about dictation and all that fun stuff, because we can look at these notebooks and we can see, he's sketching in pitches, and then he goes back and does rhythm, and then he tries to put it all together. And it must have been quite a challenge, but for his notebooks, we would be way much further into the dark about what it is exactly the most traditional of the Irish harpers sounded like. And the one that's pictured here, of course, is Don Hoheimsha, Dennis Hempson in English, who was the last of the players to use his long fingernails to play rather than the pads of his fingers. He was blind. He was something like 102 years old at the time, Mr. Bunting got a lot of his information from Hempson here.
Well, that is the correct answer, Keith. You are correct. And you get.
And if it
bonus
wasn't,
points.
you sold everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we all were in agreement that yes, it is C. Edward Bunting. So let's move on to question number 2. This Welshman was a harpist, bard, performer, composer, arranger, and collector of music. He first went to London in 1775 and was patronized by prominent Welshmen and by Charles Burney. He played in the Bach Beethoven concerts, which were London's first subscription concert series, which began around 1765. He became harp tutor to several wealthy families, and in about 1790 was made harp master to the Prince of Wales. He published about 20 books containing songs with accompaniments arranged for the harpsichord, piano, or harp, arrangements of works by classical and lesser composers, national airs with variations, and compositions of his own. He is most remembered for his 3-volume work, The Musical and Poetic Relics of the Welsh Bards. Was it George Thompson, Edward Jones, Edward Smith Biggs, or Brinley Richards? But first, a little thinking music. Any guesses?
It's not, because none of those are Welsh names. Am I correct in saying that? They don't look Welsh to me.
One of them's quite
Jones is a Welsh name.
One of them is.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the Welsh are just going to come for me. Never mind.
Just think about our ensemble name, Thomas.
Oh, okay, got it.
I'll just leave it. I'll just leave it there.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah,
Are we all in agreement?
yeah, I think so. I mean, my vote's for B. Anybody else?
Yeah, B for BBE. Yep.
Yes, I'm in.
Yeah, go
Is that
for it.
another unanimous B? Well, you guys are right. All right. Good job. I can't stump you guys. All right. Well, let's move on to question number 3. All right. Maybe I can stump you on this one. I don't know.
Ooh.
This one's a little tricky. This Scottish politician, lawyer, judge, amateur architect, poet, landscape gardener, composer, and music patron was born in 1676. He studied law at Leiden University before embarking on a grand tour, visiting Vienna and settling for 15 months in Rome, where he had composition lessons with Corelli. On returning to Scotland, he was caught up in public affairs. He was a signatory to the 1707 Treaty and Act of Union between the Parliaments of Scotland and England.
Ooh.
I know. From the age of 26 onwards, this composer had no time for serious composition. His main surviving works, mainly cantatas, were all written by about 1703. He had a natural musical gift, having command of the whole range from dry recitative, delivering words efficiently, through more melodic declamation to full cantabile singing suitable for an aria. One interesting element of his compositions is his use of number symbolism. His cantatas offer insight into Baroque attitudes to structure. As an amateur architect, he drew parallels between music and architecture, which he realized in both fields. So, was this John Clerk, George Clerk, James Clerk, or William Clerk of, is it Pennycook?
Pennycook.
Pennycook. Okay, I knew I would butcher it, but yes. But first, a little thinking music. Thinking music.
Pennycook.
Any guesses?
Well, I've got to sort of absent myself from this question because the first album that my group made, which we recorded in, the dim and dark ages of 1994, was of this man's music. So I sort of know it.
Any other people have a guess?
Yeah, I mean, I know that I've read about it, but now I, for the life of me, cannot remember the first name, of course.
Actually, I visited his house recently, and
Ooh.
it's currently inhabited by a Sir Robert Clark of Pennycook. It's still in the family, but they live in the stables rather than the big house because the big house is long gone. But the stables are wonderful.
Very nice.
I cannot remember, but so I'm gonna take a stab at D.
Mm-hmm.
Any other guesses?
I feel like I should know this since you mentioned Corelli in there too, and I'm like, ugh, I actually don't. I don't know this one. But C or D. You'll have to excuse my 20-year-old cat that's meowing in the background too. I'll go with. I guess I'll go with C. James is a good name.
All right, so we have a C and a D. Any other guesses?
I'm gonna go with Keith. I'm gonna go with Keith. So
Okay.
D.
Clark of Pennycook does sound good, actually. It's great.
Yeah. Don't give him any ideas.
Any other guesses, or should we have David tell us what the answer is? All right, David.
I'll put you out of your misery. It's John. In fact, Sir John Clark of Pennycook.
I know I left off the Sir. Sorry.
It's all right. That's his Sunday name.
Right. I was afraid it wouldn't all fit on the screen, so I just abbreviated it. But yes, good job. Yes, it is John Clerk.
If I can get a plug in, actually, at this point.
Yes.
For something that happened today, which is that, while we've not been able to play gigs here and on this island, we have to find other things to do. One of the things that we've been doing is that our violinist Aaron McGregor has compiled an enormous database of early Scots violin and fiddle sources, like from before 1750, from about 1670 onward. And he's produced this massive catalogue. And today we put it online at hms.scot. And one of the things that's included is the Clark of Pennycook papers, which have some material there that's never been catalogued before. There's a set of fiddle variations by John Clark, which I think Aaron's played it and nobody else has played it yet. We weren't aware of it back when we made our record about 25 years ago. So there's new music by John Clark waiting to be discovered, as well as the 5 cantatas and the violin sonata that we knew about already. So hms.scot is the URL if you want to explore all of that stuff. It's all... oh, brilliant. You're running it along the bottom of the screen. Oh, fantastic.
So maybe David
has to like peer over.
and this went live about 3 or 4 hours ago. So you can be a multitude of beta testers, but it's looking good.
Very nice. Well, great job. You did a wonderful job with our first game. So let's move on to the second game.
Yes, and this one is aptly called Thomas's Revenge on Cat Doppelgangers. And the reason why is because that last round, Leanne, is exactly why I created this game, because I failed miserably. And so it's my turn to get my revenge. Although I suspect that this crowd will do fairly well with my 2 questions. So how my game works. On the next screen, you will see a question with 3 possible answers. We will then listen to an excerpt that has to do with the question, which will give you a little time to think and or enjoy some music, at which point we will take a guess, or I suspect most people in here may actually get these, so that'll be exciting to see. I'll reveal that, and then I will also reveal my chosen cat doppelganger, which has something sort of to do with whatever we were talking about, or maybe not. It just kind of depends on how I felt at the time. So with that one, let's go ahead and check out the first question. And your first question is, who wrote the song "O Can Ye Labour Lee"? Was it Robbie, John, or Willie? And here is an excerpt from a CD that came out a few years ago, which I'll talk a little bit about after we've had a minute to listen.
Oh, can you labour Lee, man, oh, can you labour Lee? Get back the gate ye came again, yes, never scorn me. I feed a man at Martinmas where all pennies 3, but all the fault I had to him, he couldna labour Lee. Oh, can you labour Lee, man, oh, can you labour Lee? Get back the gate ye came again, yes, never scorn me. Old clapping's good in February and kissing sweet in May. But what signifies a young man's love and dinner last for a day? Oh, can you labour Lee, man, oh, can you labour Lee? Get back the gate ye came again, yes, never scorn me. Oh, kissing is the key, oh, love, and clapping is the lock. And making of's the best thing that e'er a young thing's got. Oh, can you labour Lee, man, oh, can you labour Lee? Get back the gate ye came again, yes, never scorn me. Oh, can you labour Lee, young man, oh, can you labour Lee? Get back the gate ye came again, yes, never scorn me.
There's just not a good place to stop in that. You just had to listen to it. All right. Any guesses on who the song is in some way related to?
I had a question. Do you mean like the song is in the music, or the words, or both?
I can't really say.
I like the way you subtly
but it's
changed the question there from who wrote it to who's it slightly related to.
Yeah, but it's only related to one person on the screen. So
because while that was playing, it was great. I'm afraid I put my academic hat on and I went to look it up in a certain volume which was published recently, where there's fairly certain guesses made about how much of these were actually written by this person and how much of them were taken from other places and all that kind of stuff. So I just looked that up, but and it didn't tell me a huge amount, but actually, what it does say, see, if I tell you where I looked it up, it tells you what I think the answer is, what I know the answer is. Well, I'll give that away, and then I'll add the extra bit because it's quite interesting. I looked it up in the new version of the Oxford Burns. It's Roald Rab, and it says, right, hang on, it's number 394 in volume 4 of the Scots Musical Museum, and lines 13 to 16 of the song were described by Burns as an old sang of my mother's. So he learned it from his mum. So he didn't write it. And there's bits of it seem to be from all kinds of places, and so I think it's a song that he's compiled and edited rather than written. But it's rather nice that he learned at least some of it from his mum.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Yeah, but we're just going to go ahead and announce, yes, you are correct. It is at least associated with Robert Burns, and this is off of the Complete Songs album, which is like it's such a great set of albums because it's basically at least everything associated with Burns. And it was one of the big people behind it was Fred Freeman, who's like one of the big, if not the top Burns authority in the world. Interesting guy to email, really interesting to talk to him, but he pointed me to his CDs and some of his lectures. So yes, good job looking it up.
Well, I mean, if you're going to big up Fred Freeman, I have to say a word for Murray Pittock, who edited the edition of the Scots Musical Museum, which is now, if you've got access to an academic library, you can get at it for free. It's finally
okay.
Otherwise, it's a very expensive academic book in sort of 2 big fat volumes. But it does have tons and tons of information about the songs that's not been available before, and it's just come out in the last year or 2.
Oh, well, I definitely have to look that one up. Okay, awesome. Well, and so my cat doppelganger has the best sideburns that I could find. So I thought those were good. There were some others too, but that one just was spot on. So good. All right, so my next one, I bet at least one, if not 2 people here, maybe everybody will know. Which Western composer was the first to employ col legno in his score? And here is an excerpt from that. I just love that. I think it's so cool.
Yep.
So I don't know the answer, but because I heard a viol, I'm going to say 3.
3.
I'm going to go with number 1.
Me too. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Tobias Hume from, yes. And I feel like I've heard some of my colleagues play some stuff with col legno and his stuff. Yeah, so I'm going to go with number 1.
Yeah, I think it says drum with the back of the bow.
Yeah, yeah,
isn't it? It's Captain Hume.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I feel pretty confident with number 1. Yeah.
We've got a couple of people commenting online who are also saying 1. So
perfect. Well, that was, in fact, the correct one. It was Tobias Hume, and it was Hark Fark from the first part of Airs. And yeah, you're right, because actually Kate played this at one of the last things the BBE did before we all kind of took off for a hiatus.
Really?
And
I wasn't even thinking of her. I was actually thinking of Arnie Tanamoto, because I had heard him play. Yeah. But yeah, you mentioned her too.
Yeah. And David, actually, when you said earlier that you had because that was Jordi Savall, right? When you were talking earlier that you had edited one of his albums, I was like, oh no, did he do this one? That would have been really funny.
No, with Concerto Caledonia, we did a Tobias Hume record. And actually, Thomas Walker, who sang, I mean, he sings the Soldier's Song in it, which I don't think anyone's done on record before because it's got such a huge range. You know, it's like well over, it's like two octaves and more. It's a ridiculous song. And Tom said it was the first time he'd ever sung professionally in his own accent because Tobias Hume was a Scot. I said, well, you know, sing it in your own voice. And he said it was the first time he'd ever been able to sing, you know, as a professional singer without having to put on an English accent, which was shocking.
Cool.
Actually, that's a really interesting question. Later, maybe we'll get on, but here's my, of course, the cat doppelganger, the ever famous Gamba headpiece. So it'll bring everybody to a concert if they just had that one out there. All right. Well, guess what? We pretty much survived mine. After a while, I was like, I should have stuck to the vocal stuff or some of the more classical choral stuff, but that's okay. Whatever. It was fun. Good job, everybody. And we'll move on to our final trivia featuring Brandy. And Brandy, what will we be doing today?
All right. Well, so the final trivia game, I usually do 2 truths and a lie, but this time it's reversed to 2 lies and a truth. So I'm going to read a series of like very, very short 1-sentence stories here, and your job is to point out which one is actually true. All right. So, and there will be a little thinking music, of course, but the first batch here is a little bit about James Oswald. So, first story, James Oswald was part of the Temple of Apollo, a secret society of composers who would gather together and make up pen names for each other. It's where he got the idea for one of his aliases, David Rizzio. Second story, Oswald left for Edinburgh for London in 1741 to elope with his beloved Marianne Melville, but they didn't actually wed until after the birth of their first child in 1742. And then the birth was 1742, not the wedding. All right. And then after the death of Marianne, Oswald was left to raise their 3 daughters and his brother-in-law's illegitimate daughter, Sally. She composed one of the poem settings in Oswald's collection, Collin's Kisses. Which story is actually true? And now for a little thinking music.
Well, I know that number 1 is false because she had that on a previous episode.
Any other guesses? So not number 1. Okay.
The second one sounds familiar. So I'm going to suggest it was the elopement story is the right one.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's not number 3 because Robert Dodsley wrote the words for Collin's Kisses, the poems.
So number 2.
Just narrowing it down.
Yeah, number 2.
2.
Is it a unanimous for number 2? Excellent.
Very cleverly written. I'm kind of in the middle there somewhere, but yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I am very
totally convinced. You're very devious.
Yes, right. Sometimes I'm very tricksy and sneaky in these, but you guys are right. It is, in fact, number 2. That is the true one. And you guys have already heard from the process of elimination why the other 2 are false. So, all right, good job, everybody. Let's do the second batch here. So this is about our beloved Turlo O'Carolan. So first little mini story here. Before Turlo O'Carolan met his wife, Mary, he was in lust with a teenager named Bridget, so much so that he wrote a tune for her. She was the schoolmaster's daughter of the school for the blind that he attended. O'Carolan later, this is the second one, O'Carolan later met and married Mary McGuire at the age of 50. Unfortunately, having married later in life, he was not able to have children. And then the final story, when O'Carolan was 21 years old, he was given a guide and a horse to tour all of Ireland playing his tunes for patrons. He was repeatedly invited to perform in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but preferred to stay in his home country. Which story is actually true? And now for a little thinking music.
Well, I know, I'm pretty sure it's not number one because he, in fact, was in lust with Bridget, but he actually wrote at least, that we know of, 3 tunes for her. And then I'm pretty sure that he did, in fact, have kids, because I think his son actually helped publish a collection of tunes. So my vote is for 3. Anybody else have something to add? I'm not convinced about some of that, but let's hear it.
You convinced me. I'm on board.
Yep. Sounds good to me.
I'm nudging towards 3, and you tipped me over into 3ness.
It just depends on how tricky Brandy is her wording, right?
Right.
I know, because she'll like nail you on like 3 years earlier or something, and you're like,
Like, I don't remember that Breed's father was a schoolmaster, but I'm sure that he was in lust with her because of those 3 songs. So.
All right, Brandy, we're for 3.
You're for 3? All right. You're actually stumped. It was number 1. So, because he did write a tune, I didn't say that it was only the one tune, right? But so number 3, to my knowledge, he was not invited to perform repeatedly, or I don't know if ever at Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Yeah,
David,
part I wasn't.
It's pretty unlikely now.
Yeah. So that's the false part about that. And then, of course, Keith, as you mentioned, he did have children. He had 7 children. So that one was false, of course. So, all right. So I stumped you guys. Haha. All right. Here, let's do this last little batch of stories here. This is about Francesco Barcanti. So, Francesco Barcanti, though Italian, lived most of his life in Scotland. When he did return to London, he had been away so long that he lost his position in London's musical society and was forced to become a violist in Handel's opera orchestra. Second story, while in Scotland, Barcanti earned a post with the Edinburgh Musical Society and married a common girl named Jean. While not much is known about Jean, we do know that Barcanti had a daughter with her named Jenny. And then the third story, after returning to London and accepting the violist post in Handel's opera orchestra, Francesco decided to anglicize his name to Francis Barcenti to better fit in with the other players. Which story is actually true? And now for a little thinking music.
Can I just say, like, the whole like trope about violas kind of being made fun of? The first one, just I laughed so much because it was like it wasn't bad that he was forced into Handel's opera orchestra. It was that he was forced to become a violist.
Well, maybe
Anyway, sorry.
I will concede. Maybe I shouldn't have put that word there.
Does that mean?
I don't know if he was forced to, or if that was like.
So can we rule out 1 and 3 as viola jokes?
Yeah, right.
Oh man!
I don't think 3 is true because I've never heard that alternate name.
Well, he already his Book of Scots Tunes, published in Edinburgh in 1742. It says Francis Barcenti on the cover. So he'd already called himself Francis by then. So that one can't be right. And it's a viola joke.
So what are we thinking?
I honestly can't remember, but it does sound vaguely plausible that he married a Scots lass. I just can't remember any of the detail.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's number one. I don't know. I'm just gonna go with number one. For
I'm gonna
BBE.
go with
What?
Sure.
All right, so we've got a vote for one. Any other votes?
I'm gonna go for.
I'm gonna go with two.
You're gonna go with two?
Because he was only in Scotland for about 7 years, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna go with two as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm on board. I'm switching. Number two. I'm with them.
Peer pressure.
Excellent. Right.
BBE B.
Yes, for the B. Everybody on board with number two?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And you guys, in fact, have it right for that reason that David just said. Not at all most of his life spent in Scotland. Yeah, it was like 7 or I thought I read 8, but yeah, somewhere. But yeah, just that short period of time, in a whole lifetime that was spent in Scotland. And yes, so there you have it. You guys survived the games. So, and by the way, so that Francis Barcanti, I totally made that up, as far as like the last name, was it spelled? How was that last name spelled as far as the,
in the book? It's just Barcanti as in the,
just as it is. Okay.
But,
Yeah. Cause I was like, that would be really creepy if like, that were actually like, I worked really hard to anglicize that last name. So, and I was like, oh, that part actually happened. Okay, excellent. Okay. Well, cool. Well, now we're at the part of the night where, of course, we ask all of your family secrets, all of your offshore accounts, all of that good information. But actually, we'd love to hear from each of our guests, kind of a little bit about yourselves and your journey into, not just, obviously, David, you were born into, playing Scottish music all your life, but your journey into the early music side of things and that historical perspective and hearing that from you and also from Sarah and Keith. So, David, why don't you kick us off there?
Oh boy, well, stop me because I could just carry on forever. But I'll try and do a short version, which was about sort of getting interested in. Well, I'd always been interested in the sound of the music when I first heard it as a kid, and then getting to go away to university and actually do it, and have a harpsichord to practice on and things like that, and then discovering, really through the work of John Purser, it hadn't really occurred to me that there was 18th century Scottish music out there to be explored at the time. I was vaguely aware of some of the printed versions of fiddle music from the late 18th century, but that was about it. And then to discover actually the work of John Clark of Penny Cook in particular, and I thought, hang on, these are like 5 Italianate cantatas written by this teenager for one of them. And why can't I go out and buy a record of this? Why can't I get it on a CD? And this was like the early 90s, so everything was being recorded for CD. It was that huge recording boom where, in London in particular, people were just making records all day, every day. You didn't have to play concerts. You could earn a living as a Baroque violinist just going to sessions all the time. And I thought, well, I want to be able to hear this stuff. So I'd better do it myself, really. No one else is going to do it. And so that was how it all started. And then John Purser kept sort of punting more repertoire at me, going, hey, this is good too. Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it? And I thought, oh, well, we'll keep doing this for a bit until we've done all the sort of really interesting stuff. And we just keep finding more things to do. I used to joke, I said, I've been trying to disband this group for about 10 years now, but, we could keep finding more things to do. And it's still happening. And so even, when we haven't been able to play live for the last year, we've been, I've been working on an edition for Edinburgh University Press of Alan Ramsey's ballad opera, The Gentle Shepherd, as part of a big edition of all of Ramsey's works that we're working on. And in fact, I'm going to finish The Gentle Shepherd next week. I have to deliver it, but it's not going to come out until the end of next year.
Yeah, you have to let us know, because of course we're big fans.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you've done it. And I mean, the amazing thing about having to put my proper academic hat on and look at it from that perspective is, you know, I've directed, I think, a couple of performances of it, and I think I don't know what you did actually, but I mean, what I did was, you know, I went and found some sources that I could make sense of, which are all the sort of 1780s ones, where it's very easy to tell what's going on in the music. You can give it to a singer and go sing that. And then when we were looking at what our editorial policy with the text and all the rest of it was going to be, I thought, well, this is 60 years out, and this is music that's in an oral tradition that's constantly changing, and 60 years is like 2 generations, and the music's totally different by the time you get to the 1780s. So, and my question was, well, what was in Alan Ramsey's head when he was writing these songs? What tune was in his head? And some of the tunes are different, and some of the tunes are wrong in the 18th century tradition already. By the time you get to the end of the 18th century, people have been printing them wrong for ages, and you can find where they've gone wrong. And so all that kind of detective work has made it much more complicated than I wanted it to be. But it's uncovering a story about the earlier history of these tunes, some of which became fiddle tunes later as well, which has been great fun. So I'm looking forward to that being out in the open. End of next year, I think it might finally make it into print and then into sort of digital form after that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that's very, very cool. Awesome. Well, we're going to ask you some more questions about that, so don't leave.
All right, okay.
But tell us a little bit about, you know, the start of the Berwick Fiddle Consort, how you got into like kind of early music and historical fiddling and things like that, of that nature.
Okay, so BFC was formed 2 years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, and we all met each other at a Baroque workshop. So we all of us were there to play Baroque violin, and then we realized that we all also liked fiddle music. And then because we were playing the fiddle tunes on Baroque violins, we realized that there was a lot of technical aspects that were the same. And so we just decided to look into that. And we realized that there were a lot of other people doing this. Actually, we really like Concerto Caledonia, so it's nice to meet you, David. I've studied with David Greenberg, and so have some of the other members, been to his workshops and stuff. So, yeah, we look for tunes, and we have been relying a lot on research that other people have done. So we look for collections, manuscripts that have been made available digitally, and we just go through and we make sets and we play them and we do our own arrangements. So yeah, we're just trying to learn more about the different aspects of this and different ways that just different connections to be made, and sort of, I don't know, looking for new ideas, new ways to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. What kind of folk music were you playing before you guys formed the group? Like, what is your background?
So it kind of varies. I actually didn't do that much folk music before. I was interested in it, but I just never got the chance to sort of get into it. Some of our other members have been doing it a lot more. Anna Maberry has been playing fiddle since she was a kid. And then Julia also does a lot of Irish music, and she's been doing that for a while. And so we sort of had different backgrounds in that. So we just found that playing in a Baroque violin style kind of worked really well with a lot of the music.
Yes, definitely. The Baroque bow for sure does everything naturally that a fiddle player wants. All the bluegrass players and the Irish players here in Chicago, like have the Baroque bow has infiltrated all of their schools because I gave a Baroque bow to a couple of those folk musicians. It was like, you should try this instead. And then they were like, where do I get one? So yeah, absolutely. The period hardware really does lend itself pretty naturally to folk music. Keith, let's hear from you, because I've alluded to at the beginning of the show that we have known you in many, many contexts, you know, from the Baroque bassoon and a straight up Baroque orchestra, you know, playing things like the Messiah, all the tried and true, you know, B minor mass, blah, 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 all that stuff. And then, you know, and then we've personally got to do some really cool projects with you, you know, playing dulcimer, and then also, you know, you've done banjos and harp, Irish harp. And I know right before the pandemic, you were starting a period Irish group, and, you know, and obviously very knowledgeable about that. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your journey into early music, and in particular, you know, the Irish Baroque, and how you know, came to pick up the harp and all that, because that's also a very cool story.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad to. Right. So I grew up in, my family's from the Southern Appalachians. Mom and dad are from East Tennessee. The whole family's been there for, you know, 300 years or something. And so, you know, I was always around that kind of folk music. Mom and dad were not into it. My mom loathed it. She said the words and the sounds reminded her too much of her childhood and you know, profound poverty and that sort of thing. But for me, it was really fascinating. But I didn't really get to explore it until I was older, and then I just found a fascination with this folk tradition. But at the same time, as a college student, I'm doing music ed, and you know, there's of course, you have to do the recorder because, you know, in America that's what we do. And I discovered that my little college had a much neglected recorder consort, and so I basically just sort of took it and taught myself and some other people to play, and we just put this thing together for fun. And then next thing you know, we're playing at Heaven Help Us, a Renaissance festival, and nothing teaches you about ornamentation faster than having to play the same music over and over again over the course of a weekend times 6. So we didn't do it in, you know, very good 16th century style, but we made a good attempt because I was all of, you know, 20 years old.
I mean, so fairs are very concerned about 16th century style.
Okay.
Anyway,
that is a very good point, and I made it, you know, one of my goals was to kind of give a little tiny taste. So anyway, it came time for grad school, and I looked at places where I could look into the earlier side of stuff as well. Meanwhile, I'm at this Ren fair, and there was a harp maker there, and that's where all the musicians would hang out in between sets. And so we'd talk and blah, 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 and plunk around on instruments. And I had a good friend, Kelly Stewart in Atlanta, and she was sort of showed me a few things. And I thought, you know what, I think I can do this. And so eventually I bought one and, you know, taught myself folk harp style. You know, this is nylon strung stuff, lots of fun. And then when I got more interested in early music and looking at grad schools, and I'm like, wow, you know, Doms and Dulcians and all this fun Renaissance winds, Indiana University had a program. And so I chose Indiana because of that. And so I'm doing my modern master's degree in bassoon, while sort of on the down low, I'm checking out a Baroque bassoon. And then we had a teacher that would come in every once in a while to do lessons. And I ended up winning the concerto competition for the department that year. And then I was like, hey, I might actually, you know, have a shot at this. So I talked to them about doing a doctorate, and there wasn't a program, but we made one up. And so there we go. But as I'm getting into this early music track, I'm also not forgetting about, you know, my harp and my banjo and all that stuff. And I wanted to know what an early music approach to those things would be like. And, you know, so I stumble onto a Carolyn and find out that, you know, you need a wire strung harp. And so, you know, that was terribly expensive. So instead I called a harp builder here in Bloomington, Indiana. I said, hey, do you happen to ever make these? And do you have plans? And he said, sure. And I said, how much? He said, well, I don't really make them anymore, but if you want to come be an apprentice and build one, that'd be okay. So I did that for 3 or 4 others. And then, you know, at the same time, I'm still gigging on bassoons and recorders and shawms and whatnot. And I get into the banjo tradition and shape note singing and the unaccompanied ballad tradition of my Appalachian ancestral homeland, and have a great time with that. So I've now got, like, you know, 2 or 3 gourd banjos with skin heads and fretless with gut strings and all of that fun stuff. And I've got quite a collection of either reproduction or antique Appalachian dulcimers, which are some of the most joyful things I've got to play with. And then finally with the harp, I was able to get a really nice copy of what's called the Castle Otway harp from Ireland. It was made by David Cordier here in Minnesota, and it's a beast of a thing at 35 strings. It weighs a ton, and it's got sterling silver and brass strings on it. And that's been really a lot of fun. And so that led me, you know, with that instrument, I was able to really dig into traditional ways of playing that instrument, right, which have been sort of revived / reconstructed by the likes of Siobhan Armstrong, of course, Anne Hay, and many others. This all sort of culminated in 2019, October 2019, with the biggest project I wanted to do with some of this music. Let me back up and include David a little bit. So I'd had this idea to put together a group that could do historically informed music from the Gaelic-speaking parts of Scotland and Ireland, and then I also wanted to pull in Wales, possibly. So I called this group Ishallyn, Isshallyn, which is a 16th century Anglicization of a Gaelic term meaning the people of art or the people of learning, which we find occasionally used in English writings. And so I put this thing together, and David was in the first iteration of that, David Wood up there. And as time went on, the group changed, and we tried to put together a concert of music based on the poetry of Sheelis Niceapich, Gaelic poetess, active right around 1700. Some of her songs, a lot of her poems survive, 20-something. Some of the associated tunes survive. And we're really excited that I found a tune in a collection that, as far as I know, had not been matched up with her surviving poetry. And it was a lot of fun to do that with Molly Quinn, Tim McDonald, and his collaborator Jeremy on cello, and then Peter Walker on pipes and voice. So that had just happened, and then COVID hit, and everything's been on hiatus since then. But hopefully we will be able to finally, my goal, you know, get the website up and running and all of that fun stuff, and really sort of have fun with this. Okay, I've talked long enough. Somebody else go.
Very cool. Well, actually, I have a question for David, because this has long been on my mind. Being a bluegrass player, like, you know, I've noticed a lot of different, I mean, there's a way that bluegrass is played in Texas, which is different than the way it's played in Illinois, which is different than the way that it's played, you know, anywhere in the US, you know, you take your pick. I'm curious about Scottish playing, though, like, as far as, you know, because also, you know, the way they played back then is a little bit different than the way people are playing now. What are some of the things that you've picked up on as far as, like, Scottish playing, you know, from a very historical perspective, you know, 18th century, because there's only like 2 textbooks out there, you know, to even talk about on the subject. But then, you know, and how does that really differ from the modern Scottish fiddle player, you know, or the modern Scottish player?
Not being a fiddler, I've got a limited amount of expertise in this area, but what I have done, what we did for a project about 5 years ago, we called Nathaniel Gow's Dance Band, was we got some really interesting and open-minded and good listening fiddlers in a room. We gave them all brought violins. We looked at the printed sources of the music, and we had an extended rehearsal period. And I said, well, look, what we've got here in these books is how some people wrote down how they thought these tunes went at that point in time in that place. knowing what you know about how to play these tunes that you've had passed down from your various teachers and various places of learning, how can we bring those two bits of knowledge together and see what happens? And it was a really fascinating period, and lots of things have sort of come out of it since. But just watching and listening to people's conception of what, say, a strathspey is being blown to bits when you look at the printed sources for them, which are so different to how a modern fiddler thinks, well, this is how strathspeys go. And that was massively interesting, just because, I mean, it's the nature of traditions that things are constantly changing. And so it's natural to think of them in a sort of ahistorical way. It's that this is this thing that exists. It's still living, breathing, and it's moving and it's changing. And what coming to that with a sort of early music sense of history and historical music, where you think, well, okay, this is how it is now. Okay, have we got an idea of what it might have been like then? And that's a totally different mindset. But both have got interesting things to say. And I think when you bring the two together and go, okay, what happens if we bring both of those kinds of knowledge into the room and see what they sound like together? And sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you can't, you try things out and they don't quite work, and you bring dancers in and you do see what we know about dancing and see, right, what does that tell us? And trying to sum it up in words doesn't really work. You just have to be in a room with it. and we've tried it with historical dance experts. We've tried it with a bunch of people coming in who think they're going to a ceilidh, and then we said, no, all the dances tonight are from the 1760s, and that's how we're going to play the tunes. All right, okay. And they just get on with it. So different, but those different levels of expertise and those different registers of performance were common in the 18th century as well. There's that really famous painting of David Allen's of the Highland Wedding. If you know the one, you'll picture it. And there's Neil Gow and his brother are playing, and there's a piper at a tree who's having a drink. He's having a break, because you either have the pipers or the fiddlers, not usually both at the same time. Usually one lot are drinking while the other lot are playing. And there's a very splendid bride and groom dancing, very holding themselves properly and very nicely turned out. And at the same time, doing the same dance sort of in the back of the picture, there's another couple who aren't quite so well dressed, and the guy's kilt is kind of hanging off him. He's showing an awful lot of leg, and his arms are in the air, and they're just having a brilliant time. And it's wild, but it's clearly the same dance that the very rich people at the front are dancing, and it's happening at the same time in these two different registers. And that happens in the music as well. And it doesn't have to be, oh yeah, these people were playing it like that and those people were playing it like that. No, it's all happening at the same time. And so being in a room with it is when you have a process going on rather than an ideal, but it's like, well, let's put these things together and see what comes out. I think that's when it really gets exciting for me.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Nice.
Sure.
Yeah.
David, yeah, I really want to know now what were the differences between how people played the strathspeys and the printed ones. I know you said you couldn't explain it in words, but I'd be really interested.
Sorry, this is straight out of my yearbook. This is awesome.
Well, hey. Well, there's the guy with the kilt. You see him. And the other thing, if there's any cellists watching this, Donald Gow is playing there with an underhand bow hold on the cello, and later on, sorry, Sarah, in the middle of your question, I'm going to sort of gone off because I've seen this picture.
Okay.
But a few decades later, that sort of figure of the two Gows together is something that appears in other paintings as well. Even after they were both dead, they would appear in like penny wedding pictures in barns in that formation. But Donald Gow's bow hold gets modernized, so that if it's like in 1817, I think it is a David Wilkie one, and he's holding the bow the other way around, because that was always, nobody does that anymore. We'll have to change it. That's bizarre. Anyhow, coming back to your question, strathspeys, yeah. It could be that in the 18th century, where a tune's called a strathspey, it might be saying something about the dance that's being done rather than the way it's being played. But you do get strathspeys which are written out entirely in even quavers, which of course is not what a strathspey is now. And you get all kinds of variations of different kinds of dotted rhythms and different amounts of dotted rhythm within a strathspey, from there being none at all to it being pretty much constant, or some back dotted ones and some forward dotted ones. And they're not necessarily a sort of regular pattern to what a strathspey is. And you have also, when you get a bit to about 1800, books stop being described as being of strathspey reels.
Right.
And in fact, I think it's the Gow fourth book, and they changed the title page for the later editions. And whereas originally it said strathspey reels, they actually changed it to strathspeys, reels. And it's the same music, but now they're seen as two different things. But earlier in the 18th century, that it was all part of the same thing, just being done perhaps slightly differently. So it's really difficult to say which is which
Right.
a lot of the time. Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was thinking also about how, like, I remember reading that dancers now dance strathspeys much slower than they did. And I mean, obviously we don't know the tempo that they did in the 18th century, but if they're strathspey reels, they're probably faster than what we would think of.
Could be. But yeah, it's yeah. I'm. You see, not being a fiddler, it's not in my body. What fiddlers do.
Right.
So,
It's yeah. I didn't mean to throw the fiddle question at you, but because that is actually a thing, when you're looking through all these collections, that, the notation. I'm glad you brought up the dotted rhythm thing, because that's for sure. There's a lot of discrepancies in 19th century sources too about some of these tunes that are coming through as, with entirely dotted and some not at all. It could be the same tune, and it's a really interesting thing. But anyway, I won't go off on any tangent there. But I am also wanted to ask you guys too, as far as folk music and Baroque music, reconciling the two, like how have you, and I loved what you said, David, about you have to just be in a room with it and you kind of have to live with it. There's some things that can't be, necessarily put into words totally 100%, but I am curious, or, your approach as far as like how you're remaining true to Baroque performance practices of the time, with the hardware, right? Because the hardware also gives us a lot of information, but then also too, how do you remain true to the folk side of things, and that it doesn't sound, too Baroque-y, if you will, at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer, because it's about, I mean, our conception of what Baroque music is really quite homogenous. I could come and play in an early music group in Chicago or in Montreal or in Sydney and fit in. I know what to do, because we're all doing much the same thing, with sort of various, slight variations. And that idea is utterly unthinkable in the 18th century, where the music would be different 5 miles down the road, or in the next city. There would be a different way of making sounds, and a different way of the music would just move differently. And so that sort of homogeneity is quite an alien concept in, I think, 18th century music in general. And so once you realize that, you think, well, why are we all playing it like this? And it's partly a result of having been through the 20th century, where classical music took itself away from everything else and said, no, we're something special, we're something different, which it hadn't really been so much. Its relationship with other cultures had been much broader. And I think we're still kind of recovering from that, really. Classical music thinking that it's special. And so it's about reconnecting with other ways of playing and not having to be self-conscious about it, because if you pick the right ones for the right repertoire, it just makes sense. And I think lots of groups are doing this now. The really interesting ones. They're figuring out which musical languages that still exist today make sense in other, particularly for different kinds of Baroque music from different places. It's easy. Sometimes it's easier with earlier music. But I think that just kind of makes sense to realize that it doesn't have to sound like classical music sounded like last century. It doesn't have to carry those aesthetics, because those are mostly inherited from much later anyway. And the more we find out about musicians, particularly in the 18th century in particular, the more we find, they were, apart from anything else, trying to earn a living by playing every kind of music and performing and composing and selling and doing all the things they had to do to survive. They weren't as precious about it on the whole as people have been since.
Yeah, I agree. Any parting words of wisdom from anybody else? Because I know we're kind of over time, and but
yeah, I was being summoned actually. I was like,
yes. Thomas had the face like, oh no. Excellent.
How can I not be obvious online while I'm being obvious online?
You're just always obvious, Thomas.
Come up with a hand signal,
Yes, that's right.
I was like texting messages.
Excellent.
Well,
I have to say, it sucks that we have to end, because this would be really cool, like David, to actually get to talk to you. I just know you tangentially through emails that Brandy had with you years ago. So like that was really cool, and like getting to meet Sarah on the West Coast. And Keith, you're always like, you're basically our fourth host at this point, because we have you on all the time.
Yes.
Well, it's been great to have everybody here this evening. We'll learn so much, and everybody who's joined us on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and who will see this into the future in the archived version. And I also wanted to say thank you to Brandy and Thomas and Leanne for this evening, and also our other two sessions that we had during the Well-Tempered Musician series. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. And if you're just joining us here on EMA's pages, make sure to give Bach and Beethoven Experience a like on their channels. You can see them doing this trivia and conversation thing almost every single week on a Friday afternoon. So you can always get lots and lots more of this from them, and also find out more about their recording projects and their concerts and all of that kind of stuff by going to their website. So thank you all for doing that, and thank you to Sarah, David, and Keith for joining us this evening. You can always learn more about Early Music America and our programming and the wellness series and all the other things we do at earlymusicamerica.org. And we will be having some upcoming panels that you might be interested in, including one with women from underrepresented backgrounds this Sunday afternoon, live here using StreamYard on our channels at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. So we'll invite you to join us then. But on behalf of everybody else here this evening, I'll just say thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful night.